really good. Again, love the energy. This is exactly the type of interaction that we need and we want. But we're a little bit after the hour and we need to get started. So I'm going to turn it over to Sita and Pat so we can get started. And again, love the energy. Keep it into the presentation. And then we will carry this over for our session today. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Sita and Pat. Thank you.
All right. Yes, thank you, Scott. And I was listening very intently to that discussion. I actually just looked at a house in Orofino yesterday that was on dial-up internet. So you want to talk about these issues being so interconnected. I mean, they are one and the same issue, two sides of the same coin. So my name is Angie Edwards-Kutsky. I'm a community development specialist with Clearwater Economic Development Association, serving the 5 counties of North Central Idaho. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second of a 5-part program called Moving the Connectivity Needle in North Idaho. Today, we are going to be talking about broadband planning, networks, and business plans. And we are very excited to be joined by a couple of additional guests in addition to our Broadband USA speakers. So stay tuned, we're excited to introduce you to them here soon. So as I said, this is the second of our 5-part series. You can see on there, on October 8th, we kicked things off with Broadband 101, Rural Economic Development. We had a fantastic session. If anybody is interested in catching up on that session, please let me know and I would be happy to provide the link to watch that afterwards. We also had some great technical assistance and regional discussions on the 22nd, where we really dove into community priorities and stakeholder engagement, who needs to be at that table. And that's a discussion that we're going to continue today as well. And today, in case you didn't know where you are again at getting started, broadband planning, networks, and business plans. Our goal for today is that you're going to walk away with a better understanding of broadband in your individual as well as your collective role in shaping the future of broadband in these 10 counties of North Idaho. And today we are going to be getting a little bit more technical than our first session. So it's important to remember we're all learning together. Don't get overwhelmed. The goal of both CETA and Panhandle Area Council is to provide technical assistance. And that's the goal of Broadband USA and everybody on this call today. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat at any time. There's no such thing as a stupid question. We're all learning together. Our goal is not to provide talking head webinars here. Our goal is to partner in a real and tangible way to attract investment to our region and to improve our broadband connectivity that shapes our lives. Oh, and I'm going to go back here real quick and just do a quick plug. You'll see at the bottom there is a link there. I'm not sure if you're able to click it remotely, but I will be sending that out to everybody who participated in the webinar today. And you can use that to register for the rest of the series. They are cumulative, they build upon each other. And we hope that you'll be joining us for our December session as well, which is using data as a foundation for your plan. This webinar series is provided as part of the Rev Up North Idaho program. It's made possible through funding from the USDA Rural Community Development Initiative, the Avista Fund at Innovia, and local membership dollars from both PAC and CETA membership. All right. So just a quick reminder for those of you joining us right on time, today's webinar will be made available after this presentation, including the full slide deck and contact information for our presenters. A link will be emailed to you at the address that you used to register. So if you need to correct that, please do so. Handouts, a link to the registration site for the remaining workshops will also be emailed to you. If you've not done so already, please take time to rename yourself on your little chat box with your proper name so we know how to call on you. If you have any questions, anything you want to share during the presentation, please feel free to drop that in the chat. We do have staff monitoring that. We will address questions and comments in the designated Q&A periods of the agenda or at the section breaks. And a break is built into the schedule at 9:45, but feel free to take one whenever you need one. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host today, Dorian Combrick of the Panhandle Area Council.
Morning. Thanks, Angie. Good morning to everybody that is here today. We're happy to have you. If you're returning after coming to our first session, Broadband 101, Broadband as a Foundation to Rural Economic Development, then we thank you and we welcome you back. And if this is your first time with us, we are very pleased that you're here, and we welcome you to Moving the Connectivity Needle session 2. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dorian Combrick. I am the Community Development Specialist at Panhandle Area Council in Hayden, serving the 5 northern counties of Idaho. PAC and CETA are very, very excited today to have our 2 speakers and our Broadband USA presenter to talk to you today about broadband planning, networks, and business plans. The information that you're going to take away from today's session will guide you as you begin forming local and regional broadband teams all the way through project planning and development. To kick us off today, we have a speaker that has very special experience with broadband teams and planning. I would like to introduce you to Ms. Deborah Hansen. Deborah has over 21 years of experience as a professor and county director with Washington State University Extension, focusing on community and economic development in rural Stevens County. As county director of WSU Stevens County Extension, she is responsible for procuring local funds and grant dollars while managing 3 full-time staff members, or 3 full-time staff who conduct programming and education in the areas of youth development like 4-H, food and nutrition, and agriculture. Her broadband work began in 2012 with an American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funded local technology planning team. And it became more focused as she stepped up to create and manage the Stevens County Spokane Tribe Broadband Action Team, or BAT, as they like to call it. And in 2015, in response to a 2015 wildfire disaster and issues related to lack of broadband. She is passionate about sharing the BAT successes and best practices with other rural and underserved communities. And that is what drew us to her, and we're very excited to have her today. She has a bachelor's degree in advertising from Utah State University and a master's degree in adult education from Penn State University. Deborah, we are so very excited to have you with us today.
Great. Thank you very much, Dorian. Can you hear me? Okay. Like to check. Okay. I am an almost neighbor of Idaho. There's one county between us which is Pend Oreille County, but I used to live in Idaho. I lived 13 years in Boise, Idaho. So I'm very emotionally attached to Idaho in many ways. And Dorian, can I share my screen instead of the slides? I actually talked to Eric about changing a couple slides at the end. Is that okay? Okay, thanks. Thank you. And I think you have to enable me to screen share. I wanted to make sure that it was completely relevant to the work that you're doing in Idaho. So I wanted to do that. Okay, so can you see my slide deck now? Did I see a yes? Okay, good, thanks. Okay, so this is a picture of our broadband action team pre-COVID, but I wanted to put some faces to the team. This is a portion of our team, and we get together once a month to talk about broadband. We have stopped talking about why do we need broadband and instead focus on how can we get more. Even before COVID, people in rural communities know why they need broadband. We've needed it for all the same reasons that we have during the COVID pandemic. But now it's really shown a spotlight on it. And so with that, I'm happy to see more funding and more opportunities, but we've needed broadband for a long time. So there's no debate about that. So I actually started working on broadband in 1999. And one of the first projects I did was a summit with Senator Patty Murray about broadband. So I've got lots of history with looking at this issue in this community, but I have focused on this broadband action team concept for the last 5 to 8 years, because no matter how passionate you are, you have to have a focused effort on getting information and partners to the table. And so this broadband action team is all about getting anybody and everybody to the table that we can talk, that would like to talk to us. So we call ourselves a small but mighty group of people who care about broadband, and we're working to increase awareness, access, and use. And like I just said, the awareness piece, we've kind of stopped talking about. We're really focused on the access piece, but I personally can't wait till we get to that use piece where everybody has broadband and we're starting to work with individuals and businesses to take better advantage of the internet that they have so that we can increase our economies, make healthier communities, and all of that. This is actually a picture of our librarian technician who's on the team. We have a gadget garage that has all the devices that can connect to the internet. And it really helps people test drive them to see if it's something that they want for the use that they have. So if they're just doing email, they might need something smaller than a computer. So why would you form a BAT or a group that's going to address this? Our local communities know more about broadband availability and needs than any state or federal agency. And I'm sorry, Eric, to say that in front of your Zoom face. We know in our communities where we're not connected. I'm going to share a story later about meeting with the FCC chairman, but a lot of broadband funding and decisions are based on data that is not accurate in our small rural communities. So we've got to be able to tell that story to everybody that is providing funding so that they know that we know where our broadband gaps are. This is our first internet service provider meeting that we had. There were 14, at that time, 14 internet service providers that came to the meeting, plus our broadband action team, where we could start talking about how can we help them be successful and interact with our community and our group. It was really an engaging meeting, and we've had some great successes out of it. So the question I get a lot is who should be on your BAT? And I say everybody. I don't know anybody except for those who really, truly don't want to be connected to the internet. And those are becoming fewer and farther between. Anybody can be on this broadband action team. You need your local elected officials. You need your state elected officials. You certainly need technology experts, internet service providers. They're the ones that are in this environment providing the internet. Our libraries are there. They have opportunities that come specifically to them through their funding sources. Our medical, we have all of our clinics and our hospitals involved. Schools, tribes, citizens. One of our favorite BAT members is the angry grandmother at the keyboard. She gave herself that name. We have emergency management on it. Like Dorian said in my bio, we started this current BAT effort because we had a huge fire in 2015 that they didn't have internet at the fire camp, and they had to drive a hard drive back and forth from an hour away to the county to upload the maps to keep people informed. So that right there said it's a public safety issue. It's not just schools and telehealth and economic development. Of course, we have our workforce development and economic development folks at the table. And again, our fire districts, because rural community fire districts are often points that can be leveraged for building broadband out of. And then we stay very connected to our state and federal legislators. We're one of the things that we do really well is writing letters of support or letters of comment or getting engaged in policy discussions. What does it mean in rural Northeast Washington to not have broadband, and how can we get it? So the key BAT roles for us are you have a local team leader, which is me, who's the champion facilitator, and as people have fondly called me, the border collie of the broadband action team, that sometimes gets you going in the right direction and sometimes nips you at the heels because we're not going in the right direction. We also have a coordinator, Bert, who's standing behind me there behind the infrastructure booth, who takes notes. She tracks tasks. She connects dots to things. If she sees a broadband opportunity for telehealth, she'll connect it to our medical participants. And she sits on a lot of national webinars with the framework in her head about rural broadband. And she has actually been quoted by some federal webinars by Bert in Stevens County says, because it's different in a rural community with our geography and our opportunities. And our state legislature also impacts us. And then our outside resources are people like Monica Babine, who's here, I call her a national treasure when it comes to rural broadband. But Eric Forsch is your local state resource that you absolutely need to have engaged in the conversations that you're having, because he knows what's going on at the state. Yep, there he is, waving. He knows what's going on at the state. He talks to our state director. He gets involved in regional issues. He's going to be your top-down technical expert from the state. So how do we decide what to work on? We sat down and looked at community priorities and goals. We've started to look at assets and gaps, of course. We've done community surveys. We meet once a month from 1 to 2 hours. I always say we'll end when we end, but we always seem to talk for 2 hours about broadband issues. And we want to be action oriented. We want things to be solved. Here is the mayor of Chewelah standing in front of a big roll of fiber that after a community meeting that she held, Spectrum Charter rolled out fiber to one of the parts of her city that wasn't connected. So anything we want to do. And I will say we are technology neutral, vendor neutral, politically neutral, boundary neutral. We don't care how it gets solved because there's going to be different solutions depending on your population and your geography and things like that. So one of the projects that we took on with Russ Elliott, who's our state director, he came to our first meeting and said, there's this really great speed testing tool I want to use, and I need somebody to take it on as the first project. Well, when COVID hit, we signed up and said, we're all in. And I leveraged everybody on our BAT team and every point of access that they had to get people to go do this speed test as soon as they could. And we got, within like 2 weeks, we got 2,000 people to take this speed test and populate all of those dots. What that tells us is it tells you the vendor that they're getting their internet from and their speed tests up and down. This is not like any other speed test that I've participated in before. You can get incredibly rich and granular data from this speed test that before internet service providers could contest because it wasn't quite as accurate as this. Then you can use this data to do more planning, and I'll hopefully be able to talk a little bit about that if I don't run out of time, because that's where we are right now. This speed test is now throughout the state of Washington, and there's many, many, many more dots, but we still have a lot of fire going up in Stevens County, even compared to the state map. Some of our other projects, even though I say we focus on access, we really also try to work on use of the internet along the way, because there are people in our community that do have internet and want to be able to use it better. So we've done a tech expo, which is the geeky techie version of a home and garden show for the internet service providers, where they can set up booths and meet with clients and talk about technical issues. And we have a gadget garage, which I talked about earlier, to show people what kind of equipment that they could buy. We've done 3 community broadband surveys. I hope I don't have to do another one. I'm losing my social capital on that. I think people are tired of me coming back. And then because of that fire down in South County, we've started a concept called pre-positioned fire camps. And that means pick a place that doesn't have internet out in the middle of the woods and see if you can build broadband there that would be there should we have a fire, which we hope we don't, but also provides internet access to the local folks. We've got some projects on the way. It's harder than I thought it would be, but we haven't given up yet. And then we've also done digital day camps where we bring people in to learn about internet for their businesses. And it's small groups where you actually work on your business Facebook page or internet page or images. So it's not a lecture as much as it is get your boots on the ground and let's help you figure this out. And then we have done Pathways to Prosperity conferences, which are statewide conferences that use the internet. Zoom has absolutely replaced that, so we haven't done any lately, but it's certainly tied to technology. So I think we're successful because we have a cool logo that everybody loves. They feel good about being part of the group, but we're open to all. We have a good coordinator. Bert keeps us on track and an excellent note taker. We have those connections to the national and state conversations, and we have regular meetings. Even if it doesn't seem like we can put anything on the agenda, we still meet, and I'm amazed how many things we can talk about. We have plans of action, and we support each other. If I hear about a grant for the library, I immediately connect it to them and find out how I can help them with a letter of support or things like that. We're very integrated with our team. We also share our story. As you heard in my bio, my first degree was in graphic design and marketing and communications. And that's what I did in Boise. I was a career graphic designer. So we do flyers and information and letters and websites. We've shared our story with Kathy McMorris Rogers. We've been invited to a panel for her. Governor Inslee has come to visit us to talk about this team. We did have Chairman Pai in my craft room from Washington, D.C. Actually, he was in Kansas with his parents to talk to our broadband action team about the FCC role in the mapping. And because of that mapping project that we did, we pretty much told him that his map was wrong and ours was better. Not sure where it's going, but we were very candid. We've also previously to COVID gone to Washington, D.C. to talk to legislators about our work. One of the things that I really encourage you to do is do information sheets that are specific to your community and your issues. These are one-page, front-only handouts that I create and put on the website. And if my county commissioner is going to his constituents to talk about broadband, he can take our mapping document and talk about how our mapping doesn't work. And Karen, you'll recognize that little map on the top of that. That's right from our NTIA BCAT workshop that you did for us on data. So when you guys meet next week and talk about, or next time and talk about data, those are the kinds of things that you need to be able to start telling that story. We have strengths in numbers. We do not work in silos. I do not let people say that their issue is more important than anybody else's. We bring in multiple perspectives. We really try not to duplicate efforts. If somebody else is writing a grant for something, we don't try to compete. We join in with them and help work with them. We all have limited budgets and resources and a broad range of skills and expertise, and we amplify each other's voice. Work with Eric Forsch. He's critical to your team. If he hears what you're doing in your community, he might be able to connect you with another community that's doing the same, and join forces to get more information out there. Broadband is all across the state and in every community. We can't be isolated in our own little areas. And I've seen it in our state where people have really started to come to the table and work together. That's what we need. We cannot fix this ourselves. The ISPs can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. Government can't do it alone. We have to work together. So here's some things that are going on in your neighboring state, which is us, Washington State. Monica and I kind of developed this broadband action team model, and we put together a lot of training and materials about it. I think Karen's shared some of them with you or is going to. We partnered with Washington State Broadband Office and the State Library to develop this field guide that's they're refining right now in this team checklist. We will be putting it on the Washington State Broadband Office. It'll be open source, so steal it, use it, modify it, make it your own. This is a group effort. We got to fix this across the United States. It will be launching soon. And I would encourage you, just like I'm doing for you, if you find people that could use your expertise and knowledge and information, please share it. This is something we do have to fix for everybody in our United States. It's not just a local issue. We need to be able to communicate our local issue, but we got to be able to help everybody solve it. So here's my super team that I work with: Monica at Washington State University, Russ at the Department of Commerce, and Kathleen Sullivan, who's the library director. I'd encourage you to find out who your BAT leaders are in these areas. You're going to hear from Eric today, but who are the other people that are on your side to help you move this forward? And that's all I have. How'd I do on time?
You are right on time. You
Hey!
are perfected.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to take questions if you want. I can't stay for the whole meeting. I have to leave at 10, but I'm happy to take questions, or please email me. They're going to send out my email address and information. Contact me if you'll get connections to the website and any information that you might need. And by the way, I'll do anything for Karen Perry. So.
Wonderful. Well, yes, if you have questions for Deb, please drop them in the chat. As she said, she'll be with us until 10. And so make sure you get those in early if you want her to answer them. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. Doreen and I heard Deborah's presentation on BATS with the Inland Northwest Partnership, and we just immediately called Karen. We were like, you know what, we have to get her on here. Let's bring her in. So thank you for being available on such short notice to share all of your expertise.
Hey, Deborah, the one thing I want you to do for me as a transition to Don, because he's going to be our next speaker, is to highlight that the BAT model isn't really different from the NTIA broadband planning model.
Oh, right.
That they built on each other. The language is very similar, that really we work together in terms of how we built each of these models. And
Absolutely.
that's one of the reasons why when Angie said, can we have Deborah as a speaker? I said, yes, because we've worked together for a long time, and your model, your logo is different. I like your logo. Our logo is pretty cool too, but
Oh yeah.
but the models, you're really a field implementation of the model that Dawn is going to describe right now. So these
Absolutely.
two things they fit together hand in glove.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's many different ways to do this. You just pull up resources and find out what's going to work for you. This is the one that we've been working on. And absolutely, Karen and the BCAT, I can't even remember what that stands for, but we were beta testers for that, and a lot of the information that we pulled together in terms of how we gather data and information came from that. We also have
built
the
one on top of the other.
Yep, built on top, added and embellished, changed, however it works. We are pilot tester types. We will sign up, sure, why not? What can we lose? And so yeah, Karen Perry and NTI was absolutely instrumental in our growth into this role. And you'll see it when you look at our materials. Absolutely.
And it'll fit right with what Dawn's going to cover next.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yep.
Thanks.
Wonderful. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Dawn Williams of Broadband USA and NTIA, who will be presenting our next portion here. A senior specialist for broadband infrastructure for the National Telecommunication and Information Administration Broadband USA program, Dawn Williams, PhD, is responsible for providing technical assistance to communities seeking to deploy and expand broadband capabilities. Prior to joining the Broadband USA program, Dr. Williams worked on the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, or BTOP, managing over $250 million in broadband infrastructure grants, and has led Davis-Bacon Act compliance for the entire BTOP program. Dr. Williams has extensive knowledge and proficiency in telecommunications policy and regulations. Prior to joining NTIA, Dr. Williams served as the Chief Operating Officer and Director of Research for RWA, a telecommunications consulting firm, where he led efforts in market research, the design and conduct of community needs assessments, business plans, financing options, and a variety of broadband feasibility studies, RFPs, and evaluations. Oh, Dawn, please take control here.
Thanks, appreciate that. Deborah gave a great presentation, really quite fantastic. So I'm happy to be here today. Next slide, please. Next slide too. Move right along. Thank you. So we have developed this broadband roadmap as a toolkit a number of years ago, and it's still available at our Broadband USA website. Today, what we're going to do is try to go through the major steps of that, and also introduce a little bit about what some of our next business model presentations will be. Next slide. Thanks. So we've got this broadband map and roadmap to planning, and I've worked with a lot of communities, literally hundreds. And as Deborah said, every community is in fact going to be a little bit different. So, everybody has similarities, but most communities, particularly when it comes to an infrastructure plan, there are going to be differences that are community specific. Some of those are going to be based on state law. Some of those are going to be based on what's already existing as a broadband asset. I've got allergies at the moment, so excuse me. Next slide, please. So what we want to do is we really want to talk about what the main steps are. And the first one is, of course, a vision. What is it that you're really envisioning for your community going forward? And that can also be put in terms of what are the actual benefits that you see if each one of these goals are identified. And of course, putting all this together is a strategy and an action plan. So I think what we really want to focus on in any community is putting together a broadband plan is to make certain that it's actionable. lots of communities put forward plans. And when I work with them, I say, hey, did you have a previous plan? And they go, oh yeah, we've had a lot of them. And I go, well, what happened to them? They go, well, one thing or another. So one of the things you really want to focus on is what plan can you actually put into effect? It's one thing to, have a great vision, but if the vision is simply not attainable given your situation, your community, you might want to rethink how that's going to work in terms of an actionable plan. Let's see, next slide, please. So assembling a team, as Deborah said, that's a really important part, and we're going to focus on that a little bit. We divide this up into 6 steps. We've got assessing local resources, which we're going to talk about, engaging local stakeholders, what are your technology options, and importantly, what are your organizational models for putting this broadband plan into action? And we're going to talk about some of those models and what models may appeal to certain communities and which ones may not. And we also want to talk about essentially project plans. And when we say project plans, we're talking your initial planning document, followed by eventually an implementation strategy. But the planning never stops. You have a broadband plan, you've got a nice paper, you're giving PowerPoint demonstrations, but throughout the course of this relatively long process, you're always tweaking the plan because you're gathering data, and that's going to influence the rest of your plan. You're going to be engaging stakeholders in ways that you may not have engaged before. That's also going to affect your plan. Next slide, please. So assembling a team. A mix of skill sets is good. It's nice to have some folks on there that are good at financials. It's good to have some folks on there that are reasonably proficient in knowing something about networks. It's also good to make certain that you've got the folks on your team that are important to your vision. And what I mean by that is there's lots of different kinds of broadband networks that people are going to be working with. So if you're really looking at expanded e-government, right, you're definitely going to want to have your local government IT people on board. You're probably also going to want to have your library IT people on board, because that's a network that is primarily, initially anyways, going to be an institutional network connecting government facilities and other public sites to eliminate overcharges for bad technology that they may be paying for. And in some cases, those institutional networks can, over time, grow into larger networks connecting other folks. Similarly with economic growth, primarily when I go to work with communities around the country, mostly rural, some extremely rural, also some big cities, smart street lighting projects, things like that. I want to make certain that what they're focusing on is how broadband can assist their economic development efforts. And that's vitally important because without good broadband technology, rural America is in trouble. And it's very, very difficult for an economic development strategy to take hold in rural America if there is no broadband. Broadband's not a silver bullet, not a magic arrow, but without it, you're going to have a difficult time going forward. Again, it might be that you're really focusing on the homework gap. Your school systems may not have the greatest broadband access. And in which case, that's also going to be putting on people on your leadership team that are educators, library leaders, and perhaps some organized people who are in charge of parent organizations. Next slide, please. I might say too on that last one, just as an aside, when you have a broadband team, you don't want it to all be one sort of skill set. I worked with a community a couple of years ago, and very technically savvy group. I think 3/4 of them were engineers. that was I mean, they had great ideas, but boy, the idea of trying to implement some of those ideas in a financial way were difficult. Partnerships are an important part of our planning process. They contain funding opportunities. They contain perhaps when you're funding, is it going to be a nonprofit, private operator? What kind of funds do they need to work on the project? Assets is another thing when you're structuring a partnership with people. What can those partners bring to the project? It can be, they can bring their ideas, their vision, perhaps their funding, their knowledge of local politics and state politics, their knowledge of funding opportunities. And finally, resources. It's pretty important that you have folks that have some idea of what current broadband assets are in the area. And that could be your local providers of different kinds. Remember, there's lots of different kinds of broadband providers. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about this just a moment ago. So when you're trying to develop your stakeholder engagement plans, it's important to initially think about, well, what's our primary focus? Now, for some communities, each one of these blocks is their primary focus. They want to connect every single premise in their community, and they would like it to be far better service with lower latency, better cost structures. Those are fine, as long as you have the vision that's going to make all of those things work. And that's important. In rural America, as you know, one of the reasons we don't have good broadband in rural America is because of the economics of linear density. Broadband networks are primarily organized according to how dense in linear miles the network is going to be in terms of premises. Low premises per mile makes it very difficult for private sector actors to make money going forward. We're going to talk about some of that a bit later. Next slide, please. So we know everybody wants broadband. Everybody knows how important broadband is. When you're developing your team approach, one of the things you want to be able to do is have a easy facility reaching out to people in your community, stakeholders, and telling them exactly what the benefits of broadband are to the community at whole, and then to perhaps their organization or their type of institution. So these are just some of the areas where broadband creates a great deal of value. It can, decrease student fees, save up to $600–700 per student. Business income goes up, generally speaking, sometimes dramatically so. Other times the revenue streams go up, but their market goes up as well. And the way broadband works is, in my opinion, for economic development, yes, there's some immediate benefits, but the long-term gains of having a good broadband system, the multiplier effects are quite large. So we want to keep the time frame of economic development in mind as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So step 2 on this is assessing the available resources that you have. We're going to talk about each one of these as we go through this. The first one we're going to talk about is inventory existing resources and assets. Next slide, please. Okay, so performing a telecommunications inventory to leverage community assets means you're going to be interviewing a lot of people you may not have interviewed before, you may not know. And a lot of these people are going to have some role in the future of your broadband project. It's an opportunity to make contacts that are necessary for your project going forward all the way through implementation. And I always stress to communities, to reach out to people to talk about broadband in your community. You don't need to be an expert in broadband. You don't need to pretend you're an expert. Ask questions to people, and when they give you answers, particularly in right-of-way management, for example, feel free to keep asking questions. That's an important part of developing contacts going forward in your plan. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about broadband assets, we're talking about assets your community already has that may be used to lower the cost of broadband deployment going forward. And that is simply if you're doing a buried project underground, anytime you can find gas mains, water, sewage, roads, public transport, anytime any of those systems are being worked on, that's a good time to begin to think about how the work on those systems can be used to defray the cost of future broadband deployment. And by that, I simply mean coordination between digging up the earth and laying out fiber conduits. They don't need to be full of fiber, but it's nice to have the conduits in place because the main cost of underground fiber construction is digging initially. Once the conduit is in place, with say a joint trenching agreement, the cost for construction goes down dramatically. So that's what we want to talk about when we're doing these broadband inventories. It's vital to have current information on what you have, and if possible, have all that information located geospatially, working with your GIS people. Because whatever kind of provider you're going to have, somebody with assets in the area, a new provider, a nonprofit, a utility, municipally owned, co-op, to the extent that you have good GIS maps indicating where broadband assets are and where assets can be used to defray the cost of future deployment, a huge help. Next slide, please.
Don, can you double check real quick? Am I on the current slide or am I one slide ahead of you?
I think you're one
You're one
slide
slide
ahead.
ahead, that's fine.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, we're caught up.
Listen, I'm more than willing to be behind you. It's okay. So the wireless inventory, so that was pretty much a horizontal inventory, right? So this is going to be a vertical inventory set. And again, we have some of these nice punch lists on the Broadband USA website. So as Deborah indicated, and as we are at NTIA, we are technology neutral. We are also provider neutral. We are organizationally neutral because we just want to see fiber deployed. We want to see broadband deployed where it isn't. And we want to see the unserved areas get served and the underserved areas become better. And whatever that technology is, we're good with that. And for a lot of the big empty wireless technology is a way to go. Fiber backhaul is important, but anyways, I'm getting inspired myself. So part of this is look at water towers, high buildings. Is there any rooftop for antennas, existing cell tower space, street lighting poles? So one of the things that's going forward is on these street lights, there's going to be small cells placed there eventually. And depending on the load bearing ratings, use of easement on small poles, you should try to take advantage of. It's about 35 feet for small cell usage. And that usually has a range of about 1,500 feet. So it's also important to keep track of your poles and who owns them. And that should be also part of your GIS map if it's not already on there. Water towers, very useful in the Midwest for fixed wireless situations. Next slide, please. Okay, dig once policy, everybody's favorite. Just really hard to implement and sometimes difficult to use. Not everybody who's digging up your earth wants to have company when they're doing it. We think it's a great way to go forward. We also think one-touch pole policy is a great way to go forward as well. That particular set of policies, I believe, is still in the courts. But you want to align broadband planning projects to the schedule and location of other public work processes. if you're looking to attract a private company to the area or someone in the area that has assets, try to think about what it is to go through permitting. And if you can reduce the expense of permitting, the time delay of permitting, that's helpful. It's not a cure-all, but it's something you're bringing to the table if you're trying to do a public-private partnership. Same thing with sidewalk repairs, if your community has sidewalks. And all of these things are basically going to help you put together a broadband map that can be used in your planning process going forward. Next, please. Okay, land and space. So this is something, I currently have construction going on if you're hearing beeps. Sorry. There's a, we're going to talk about public-private partnerships later too. But one of the things for a public-private partnership is what it is you as a community bring to the table. Of course, that could be funding, that's the big one, but you can also bring plots of land suitable for a network operations center. That's about 2,500 square feet minimally. Inside of government spaces for hub locations. Wireless siting opportunities for existing wireless access points, Wi-Fi access points. And that's basically devices allowing for a wireless network to collect to a WAN, wireless long range network. So those are all things that you also want to bring together when you're doing these asset inventories. Next slide, please. This is the easiest one. You can get a lot of this information online. Karen's going to give a presentation later on, not today, on data sets. And one of the things in these data sets that can be brought to bear is you map out on your GIS system where the larger institutions are, because those institutions may well be a really good opportunity for revenue for your network. And for an example, work with some communities, and then when they're putting together their public-private partnership opportunities, they say, listen, you know, if you come in, part of what we're going to do is we're going to put our institutions that we have control over on this new network. And that gives the person putting in the network a revenue stream from institutions, which is pretty useful. Other ways to do this, tax improvement finance districts, TIFs, and industrial parks. Industrial parks and TIFs are particularly important if you're trying to get funding from EDA. We can talk about that too later. Next slide, please. Engaging stakeholders. Well, Deborah Hanson gave us a great view of engaging stakeholders in her community in Stevens County, Washington. Again, every community is going to have quite a different set of stakeholders. And it's important to realize that, you know, in a lot of rural America, they do not have grant writers on board. They don't. Their IT person may be shared school, library, 2 or 3 local governments. So working with stakeholders is really going to be dependent on what kind of community you have, how sophisticated it is. Does it have higher educational institutions? Does it have community colleges? What's it doing for workforce development? How active is the local economic development group? Are they connected to the regional economic group, et cetera? Anyways, what you really want to do is try to find out how to strengthen these relationships with your community stakeholders. And part of bringing together your planning team is to share the vision with some of these larger stakeholders and bring them into your planning team structure, whether that's from hospitals, Chamber of Commerce's, economic development organizations. All of those are fine groups to work with all through your process and bring some of their leadership into your planning organization. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do we want to do? We've got two main things here is that, number one, you're not going to be able to communicate with every stakeholder every month. That just takes a lot of work. And most times, everybody on these broadband planning task forces, they have at least one other job. So you want to make certain that you're engaging stakeholders throughout, but when they need to be engaged, not constantly every single time you have a meeting, because that's going to be too much for everybody, in my opinion. One of the things you want is to get buy-in. Make sure that everybody in that community knows that this is going to be very helpful to their success, because that'll mean buy-in follows. Once they know the project helps them be more successful, that's a good start for buy-in. Two-way communication, of course, share feedback with each other, and transparency is huge. It's very, very good to let people know when your meetings are, what your plans are. And at the same time, it's also good to have in the back of your mind as a planning group, managing expectations. Sometimes, people will hear about a broadband task force and everybody's excited. Because they think it's going to happen right away. And usually it's not. It takes time to do this. So managing expectations is an important part of this. Next slide, please. Okay. So anyways, these are the 6 steps, which we've kind of gotten through a bit. The next step is going to be evaluating technology options and business models. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about some of these technology options. Obviously, fiber to the premise is the gold standard. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. Not every community anytime soon is going to get fiber to the premise. It's just unlikely in rural America, where density per linear mile is very low. But fixed wireless is a very good option if there's good line of sight. Fiber backhaul is an important part of good fixed wireless systems. There's also opportunities for wireless mesh networks. They're mainly going to be, think cell phone mesh networks. Those can also be useful, certainly in campus settings where they're already done, corporate or otherwise, but they may also be useful in not really rural areas, but I'm working with a community in southern New Jersey at the moment. This might be a good option for them. It's hard to know initially. So you want to consider the technology options as you're going through. It's also quite possible to have hybrid systems. Mostly when we think of hybrid systems, we're thinking of old coax cable systems that have run fiber. That's a great hybrid system too, in fact. But hybrid systems can also be a mix of fiber and fixed wireless technologies going forward. And it just depends, again, on what your local community is doing. And then what kind of network are you building? So when we did BTOP, 90-some% of all of our BTOP projects were middle mile networks. And in BTOP, what that meant was we really the networks weren't connecting to residential users. They were connecting to anchor institutions, libraries, hospitals, schools, technical colleges, things such as that. Very, very useful, because once you have a middle mile network in a rural area of America, it's much easier for ISPs to make that final mile connection, because they don't have to build a middle mile, which is how it reaches out to the internet. So some state governments in their programs, they fund middle mile. Federal government programs, USDA, they really fund last mile projects. EDA will fund middle mile projects. EDA doesn't very often, to my knowledge, even now, fund last mile residential projects. So again, it depends on what it is you're looking for funding, what kind of network will they fund. And digital inclusion needs to be talked about in here. if you build a network and they will come, sometimes that's true. Sometimes you build a network, and what you have to do while you're building it is engage in digital equity and information and training programs. And that can run the mix of households, businesses, laptops, tablets. Is there going to be a brick and mortar location where people can come and learn about how to work the internet to their benefit? These are, again, all parts of the planning process. Next slide, please. Okay, so we just talked about some of these things. And the right fit's going to be based on objectives and needs and what your community can handle, frankly. I always think the most important part is to first reach out to your local providers, to the extent there are local providers, and talk with them about what their plans are, if they have any, what the time frame of those plans are, and what is it that's preventing them and has prevented them from expanding their network. A lot of ISPs and mom and pop so-called cable operators, that's an important conversation for them to have with you as well. It's also important, if you've got Comcast and the other MSOs nearby, it's also good to chat with them and get their point of view on things. One of the benefits of that is when you have a public hearing in the future and you're talking about a nonprofit organization or a municipal build, a co-op build, one of the questions that's going to be first asked is, hey, did you talk to the local providers? And if you haven't talked to the local providers yet, that throws a monkey wrench right away into your public hearing. So I think it's important for many reasons to chat with your local providers early on in the process. Next slide. Organizational model. So, well, I've done feasibility studies on all of these kinds of organizational models over my career. And part of this is going to be dependent on your state law. There's about 22 states now that have some sort of legislative restrictions on what municipalities can do to provide telecommunications services. Others still have restrictions on what electric co-ops can do. It was just last year that Mississippi passed a law that allowed their rural electric co-ops to provide broadband service. About 1 month after that law was passed, I got invited down to speak to all the co-ops that were getting their energy from TVA, mostly the northern part of the state. And they're excited as heck. The co-ops are putting together in Mississippi over $100 million worth of build projects already. So the type of organizational structure, the first thing to remember is, what does your state allow? What does your state facilitate? If your state does not allow for rural co-ops to provide broadband, well, that's probably not the best organizational model to think about right away. The same with municipalities. As a side note, there are thousands of local governments and county governments that own their own fiber network to provide services to themselves. And then there are a few hundred, I guess almost 500 now, that provide services to residential units. The vast majority of those municipalities are electric cities. They already provide electricity. And providing electricity and providing broadband have a lot of things going for them when they're done together. Anyways, public-private partnerships, very important. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay. Well, so P3 projects. Lots of different ways to do this. Many P3 projects that I'm familiar with actually occur in relatively dense communities that are doing pretty well, but those communities have enough resources to want to have a competitive system. And they put together these P3 applications. Another set of P3 projects works with your public utility districts. They put in middle mile networks, and then they lease those networks out to last mile providers. That's another type of a public-private partnership. And part of what you want to think about in public-private partnerships is, again, you as a public entity, a nonprofit, what is it that you bring to the table? Because when all is said and done, a public-private partnership is a contract. And it's going to go back and forth between your legal teams, redlined, highlighted, and you're going to be divvying up the responsibilities, revenue, operating, risks, rewards, and what happens if the financial projections don't work out. So all of those things are going to be part of your P3 project. We can help you on a one-on-one basis work through some of those issues. They do tend to get kind of complicated. And again, P3s, it all comes down to a contract. Next slide, please. Okay, risk tolerance, that's an important part of any group going into a P3 project. The private operator would like to defray as much risk as possible and put that on the public partner. So a number of P3 contracts that I looked at, if the financials don't match up in reality, the public partner makes up that difference. So that can be risky for a lot of communities, and we might want to be careful about that. None of these partnerships turn out to be exactly the same. There's some common models. A couple of ways to think about these things from my viewpoint is private sector led. In this one, the community partners with a commercial operator. The operator builds the system, owns the system, operates the network. The community provides maybe planning, monetary, regulatory support. Next kind is really government-led, private sector supported. Community owns the network, but private partners operate it and they construct it. That is a very popular model for many communities. Running a network is not rocket science, but it does take a lot of time. It takes positions, it takes employees, it takes contracts. So a lot of communities will say, listen, here, I'd like to help you out financially. I want to make sure the planning goes right. I do not want to operate this network. That's just too much for us. We don't want to do it. Last one is a joint ownership model. Relatively more complicated because the commercial operator and the community organization jointly own the network and share in capacity and running the network. Those agreements get pretty tricky. They get down to, what happens when a rodent chews through your conduit. Who deals with that? Next slide, please. Thank you. Developing project plans. So we're getting to the end, which is good. Now you're really thinking about what it is you're going to do. Next slide, please. Okay. So you've got your program description, your goals, organizational structure, leadership and management. You're working out what your products and services are going to be. By that, I mean, look, are you just offering a pure internet play? Are you trying to offer cable type video services as well? Are you trying to offer IP phone services? A lot of communities are really focused on internet only, and everybody else can, get on board and make their choices once they have internet. Those things differ in terms of financial complexity and operational complexity. And those are things that your planning group will look at in detail. Okay. Operating and financial models. So we're going to have a separate session on business models, what those models look like, what assumptions drive them, how to vary those assumptions in your sensitivity analysis, because you can get any set of assumptions and make the project look wonderful. That's not a trick. That's easy to do. You pump up all the assumptions, it looks great. But what you really want to do is run sensitivity analysis so you've got worst case to best case, and probably want to pick something in between. I was working with a co-op in Missouri almost 2 years ago, and I was at a conference with him last year, and he came up and he goes, you know, when you talked to us and said, hey, don't put in 80% penetration, put in something more like 45 or 50. So we did that. It made us really comfortable. We're up to 70%. So it's good to make certain, you don't oversell the system to yourself, because the system has to be financially viable, sustainable, which basically means having a good positive cash flow. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. There we go. So you're putting together your plan, and you're going to show it to somebody. Maybe you're going to show it to the city council. Maybe you're going to show it to private investors. Maybe you're going to show it to a potential private partner. What do you need to have in this plan? Well, the executive summary is key. I remember turning in feasibility studies to local government officials, and a lot of the elected officials wanted, a nice, brief, quick summary, because they could get their hand around it. They could take it out, show it to people. They weren't interested in Appendix A through Z. A good program and project description, interconnection points in the region, that's part of that plan. Leased or contracted network assets. Are you leasing dark fiber to get to an internet point of presence? What's the variations in your cost per mile? Did you look at aerial? Did you look at underground? Balance those out. Your organizational structure, again, highly dependent on what your state allows and what your community already has. Market analysis. So that can get tricky. Running surveys to gauge market penetration gets harder and harder every year. Just does. People's got cell phones. They don't have landlines. People have caller ID. It gets very, very difficult to do phone surveys. So mostly what we recommend is a combination approach. Computer-aided surveys, perhaps a mailer if you've got a utility, as well as some random dialing. See how that goes. Put them all together. Get your estimated take rate. And then develop your income statement and your statement of cash flows and a balance sheet. So all of those are part of your actual feasibility study plan. For this, you can hire a consultant. The consultant can provide you with draft documents, which you review. But one of the things you want to make certain of is that the consultant's product is yours, so that when you get it back, you can manipulate the spreadsheets. That's a vital thing. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay. Prepare the broadband plan, showcase your efforts to gain community support. Just 2 months ago, big co-op in New Hampshire had their second vote on whether to become a broadband supplier. The first vote didn't work. Second vote worked really well. And part of that was that they did a lot more outreach the second time around. The first time around, they just assumed everybody would love it. Second time around, they educated a lot of the people who were eventually going to have to vote, their membership. So I think that's pretty important to do. Tell them about the technology options. If you haven't chosen fiber to the premise, some people will be upset. And explain to them why the system isn't being completely fiber to the premise. Sometimes that'll work. Sometimes people will still be upset. Next slide, please. Okay, implementation plans. Next slide. Great. Thank you. So the easiest one is this first one. Encourage the provider to extend the network or provide other services. Slightly more complicated is you're running a network on somebody else's open access network. That's a good one if in fact there's an open access network in your community that you can jump on board. Or if you've got an open access network and you can attract ISPs to provide that service for you. There's a lot of ways to do that. Lincoln, Nebraska's done a very interesting set of projects over the course of 15, 16 years now. They put conduit and ductwork all over the place, and they lease that to providers. That's turned out to be a very good system for them. Build and extend your network. That's the most complicated of them all. And again, that's is going to be dependent on what your local resources are and what your law allows. Next one, please. Thank you. So we've been doing more and more work on smart ag. And we have another group in NTIA Broadband USA that works on smart communities, smart regions, part of the global Teams Challenge. It's important to remember that the network that you're going to build or have built for you or expand is also probably likely to be the network that picks up the signals from millions and millions and millions of sensors that are going to be put all over your community in the future. So some of those things that sound kind of silly, smart refrigerators, for example, in my opinion, but smart ag is really important. That's really going to be the future for agriculture. I've worked with John Deere, AEM, American Machine Manufacturers. They're really working on these things. Their problem is connectivity in rural America. So right now, there's lots of good equipment out there. It's smart ag equipment. And the issue is connectivity of that equipment. At the moment, cell phones seem to be the predominant one. But that's an important thing going forward. If you're in an agricultural community, definitely focus on smart ag and talk to your farm bureau people. If you have a grange, talk to them, because they also want to, they're big stakeholders if it's a rural ag community. Next slide, please. Try to get through these things. Finance, oh, thank you, good. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this. We're going to talk a lot more about this in great detail in one of our further sessions. This is why it is important on your planning task force to have somebody who's familiar with financing, perhaps an accountant, someone along those lines, someone who has put together business plans in the past, so that they know what the fundamentals of an income statement and a balance statement are. They know how to run depreciation schedules, things such as that, because that's all going to be part of the plan that you put together to an investor, whether that investor is USDA, EDA, private company. So you want to make sure that they understand that you know how this works, because you don't want to come in with a plan that doesn't make any sense financially. That gets you eliminated really quickly. Next slide, please. Okay, so you've got revenue, you've got cost savings. So think about cost savings, give you a good example. We all know what revenue streams are, but suppose that you're working with a county government and they've been using Comcast, to pick someone, to provide for their communication services for the county government, public safety, libraries, everything. And the contract comes up and suddenly it looks like it's 3 to 4 times what it used to be. And you negotiate, nothing seems to happen. So the county does a feasibility study, puts in their own institutional network. And the cost savings over the course of 5 years pay for the network. So that also has to be thought about when you're doing revenue and cost sharing. It's not revenue, but it's definitely a cost sharing. That needs to be factored into your return on investment, as an example. How am I doing on time, by the way?
Yeah, we got to wrap. We got to still have Eric left and got to take a break.
Okay, thank you. I can talk like this for a long time. So estimated return on investment is important. And also what you'll probably want to put in, not every business plan requires it, but you're probably going to want to get some estimates of your net present value. And that you can do that in a couple of ways. One is you can just, put in the formula net present value as though your system has no value at the end of its life. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is you put in your net present value, but you also put into the calc what the value of the system is at the end of the term. Some investment people like that, others do not. But you can certainly do it for yourself. And we can help you with that on a one-on-one basis. And I see the lovely 5-minute break coming up. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
That was wonderful. I hate to cut you off, Don, because this is such important information. So thank you so much for going through
Thank
this.
you.
And I'm sure we will bug you with plenty of questions here. But as Don said, we are coming up against our time for our 5-minute break. We do also have some interactive polling questions that I'm going to put up on the screen. So while you're taking your break, if you want to take the opportunity to look through these, let us know some of your answers. They just kind of go through what we have talked about in these first 2 sessions here. And feel free to expand on your answers in the chat box, and we'll kind of see where we're at and try and reconvene here in about 5 minutes. All right, and as we're doing this here, I know we have a couple people who have joined us by phone, and we can just see your telephone number. So if you are joining us by phone, would you please introduce yourself? And we can start with the 208-761-4052 number. Anyone want to claim that one? No one. All right. I think we do have another 208 number down here, 208-752. Ah. So in the chat here, Larry, you've accused cul-de-sac of having community ennui, huh? This is the problem? Oh, Larry stepped away. I didn't see that.
Mhm.
Oh. Nice. Cool.
All right, we'll let Eric rejoin us here. And in the meantime, if you're coming back from your break and you haven't taken a vote on these polling questions, please take the opportunity to do so. I'll go ahead and leave them open through our next presentation if you need a little time to think about them. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started again here. And Dorian, would you like to present our next presenter?
I sure will. Hi, everybody. Hopefully everybody's back and ready to get going again. Our next speaker that we have today is Eric Forsch, our very own Idaho Broadband Development Manager at the Idaho Department of Commerce. Eric is the Broadband Development Manager, as I said, with the Idaho Department of Commerce, Office of Broadband. And he works with existing Idaho companies and communities to help them improve and grow their broadband infrastructure. His previous experience includes managing the Business Retention Expansion Team with the Department of Commerce, Regional Manager for Manpower's Idaho office, which assisted Idaho companies with their workforce needs. And he worked as Senior Business Attraction Specialist with the Idaho Department of Commerce, which resulted in more than $500 million in capital investment and creation of 3,000 new jobs in Idaho, and projects including expansions in the aerospace, outdoor recreation, FDI, technology, and craft beer industries. He also served as an adjunct professor at the College of Western Idaho and has 3 years in the banking industry. He received his Bachelor of Arts in History from Boise State University and Master of Arts in History from University of Colorado. Thank you so much for being here today, Eric, to be with us and to discuss your expertise.
Thanks, Dorian. Well, as you can tell from my bio, the previous speakers have way more experience in broadband than I do. And so I feel very honored to be able to kind of participate. And I think today's presentations in general have been absolutely fantastic. And I really appreciate Don's comments and of course, Deborah's. Both of them have really good practical information for communities on what you need to do to kind of get your broadband infrastructure going. And I think that when you kind of look at the trajectory of today's presentations, I am a good tail end to all of those, because basically how we've gone today is how you need to do it. You need to first meet with Deborah and kind of go over and get a plan, get a community action plan together. And then you need to go talk to Don and figure out how you're going to fund it. And then you can come to me for support. So it works out really, really well. So as I said, I want to really, again, thank you. Big thanks to CETA, big thanks to PAC, big thanks to NTIA and Broadband Now, and Broadband USA, just for allowing me to kind of participate on this. So, you know, it's crazy. Our office is a relatively new sort of office. We were started in 2019. Governor Little created a broadband task force, and that was led by our Director of Commerce, Tom Keeley. So we created a list of things to do in terms of mapping, which was definitely a priority for us, but also identifying important zones in the state, important areas that needed broadband infrastructure support, and creating an Office of Broadband. All of those things were kind of top on the list of priorities. So this past, we got, I think the order was signed in spring of this year, and we created an office officially in July 1st of this year. So things have been relatively new, but we've been moving quite quickly in the broadband arena since then. So it's been pretty much nonstop since since about May, which has been really, really great. Perfect. Thanks, Andy, for changing the slides for me. This is great. So on the next, so as you see here, this is great. Oops, hold on a second. Perfect. So as you can see here, one of the things that we're seeing right now with broadband is that we're seeing and I keep hearing stories as I'm talking to communities across the state of Idaho. I'm seeing dramatic changes that I anticipate will continue. And this is if you're on the call when we at 10 o'clock my time, when everyone joined on, you could hear Don and I talking about this issue. But we're seeing an increase in people moving to rural areas. But as a result of that, there is a digital divide there. And this is one of the biggest issues that rural communities face. And how you overcome that is is a huge challenge.
Not handy. What are you trying to do?
Anyways, sorry, I don't know. I don't know what that is.
Eric, I'm going to mute everybody on the call real quick, and then if you just want to unmute yourself.
No, that works.
Let me see if I can find you one.
I'm sorry, Chris Curtin, can you please mute your microphone, please? We can hear you on the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Go ahead, Eric.
Normally I have dogs in the background, so that. But anyways, so as Don and both Deborah mentioned, the issues with the digital divide are really threefold. There's an issue with broadband infrastructure, which we're trying to address from the state's perspective. There's also an issue with lack of devices, which is also a huge issue. You may have infrastructure in your area, but does everyone have a device that can connect to the internet? And do they have multiple devices? For example, I just got this example last night. I was talking with an ISP in North Idaho, and they were talking with a family that had basically got improved broadband to their house, which is great. So before they had been connected with actual broadband speeds, they were all using their mom's cell phone and her cell phone data plan to do all their schoolwork at home because they didn't have any options. So using the schools, there was $30 million set aside to the Department of Ed in Idaho to kind of help buy devices for kids. So using those funds to help buy devices, plus adding infrastructure dollars to help connect that home to better broadband, you're already reducing the amount of stress for families like this who struggle because there's not, as everyone is forced to go online, what do you do if you don't have those options? That is a serious issue that needs to be addressed. And then the other issue is cost. Cost is a huge concern. I see satellite is sometimes the only option for people in very remote communities. But if your plan costs you $200 a month and you have a data cap on that, and then all of a sudden your monthly bill for broadband goes to $300, how affordable is that? And especially when you need to hop on Zoom meetings more often. Again, everyone's using more data now. Those things are a huge issue. So that's really, as an office, really, and those are the things that I'm trying to kind of look at and address, and just to kind of, again, help break down that digital divide. So as you can see here, there's some data from Pew that I just pulled up earlier last week. And again, there's more people. The great thing is more people are using devices, so you're going to need more connectivity, and at least that allows for people to at least access the internet. But this is where trends are going. So we need, again, more of that infrastructure, more of that fiber to connect to more towers, to not only allow more cell phone carriers to have access and have more capability and infrastructure. Because again, you have communities like I was talking with the Elk River, and there's a business there that was super excited to have internet because now people can make phone calls using like a voice over IP, using their phones. I've visited friends in remote parts of Idaho where they don't have cell service. They have internet at like 10.1, but that's it. So you can talk to people, which is great using voice over IP, but that's your only option. So again, the challenges with remote Idaho is stark, and that's something that needs to change. So we see also with some of these that the change, I think the moving to remote is going to continue. So I see people wanting to kind of move to remote areas. But again, that gap there is pretty crucial. There was a Market Edison research poll saying 30% of parents or guardians with kids learning online and making less than $50,000 a year say their internet access is inadequate for their online schooling. So again, going back to what I said earlier, the challenge there is just, these kids are forced to go online. They have to because of the COVID protocols. And again, going forward, I don't see this changing a whole lot. How do you kind of help those parents meet those needs? Next slide, Angie, please. So what we're seeing too, we're also seeing more people move to Idaho. Sorry, that there's just a graphic issue. But it looks normal on my screen, so apologies everyone. So more people are moving to Idaho. So this is a cool, I just ran this data set from MZ. So this is showing the change in population projections from 2015 to 2025 by county. So again, we're not surprised here that people are moving to the state of Idaho. Every rural community I talk to sees an increase in people moving to the area. Don and I were just talking about how Idaho is experiencing a ton of housing growth, and housing prices are expanding. Sandpoint was just labeled a couple weeks ago a Zoom city in Forbes. I literally just saw earlier today a note from it was crazy, from Stuart Title, so the chief economist there, listing Ketchum, Idaho as their #3 U.S. small mountain town. Again, you're seeing these, like, where people are moving to these rural areas. One, I think as a result of COVID-19 and people wanting to be in more remote areas. But on the flip side of this, there's more ability for them to work remotely because jobs allow this. From my perspective, I think from a U.S. economy perspective, the biggest challenge before was you had all these companies that didn't really have HR policies around people working remotely, and people weren't comfortable with that. That has now changed in both those factors. And so while I think there will be a return back to work, I definitely don't think people will be returning back to the office in the levels that they were beforehand. And you're seeing this, like there was a Gallup poll that said nearly 60% of workers are now working remotely, but and nearly 2/3 of those employees who have been working remotely would like to continue to do so permanently. And so I think that's a good indicator of that, again, once there's a vaccine, it's rolled out, like you will see more people working remotely from home. And what that means for me is a huge opportunity for rural Idaho. And that's really where I have my I'm pinning my hopes. I want people to move to more rural communities. Angie, you should be excited. We're working on projects in Orofino. So when you want to buy your house in Orofino, let me know your address. So I'll make sure to tell the providers there to connect your house. So that's great. I do this for anybody, so it's not anything, but yeah, that sort of stuff is crucial. Again, as people are looking to buy, homes in more affordable locations, going to these remote communities is essential to the support and long-term viability of these areas. So that's which I'm hopeful. But as I said, when Don and I were talking, the key is finding available homes and finding and making sure those communities have adequate broadband. I was just, it was interesting. I was talking with the team from MZ. MZ is going through a major expansion in Moscow, for example, and they were, you had employees there who were trying to find homes and live in that area. And the biggest challenge for them was finding available homes, because the homes in Moscow, there's not a lot up for sale. So they wanted to go to more rural areas, but they couldn't move to those rural areas because where the homes were for sale and they were affordable, but because there wasn't broadband. So again, like as Don said, and where you need those two components, you need housing and you need broadband. And that's where, you can talk with, you can talk with the team, you can work on a broadband plan, and to kind of work on those components so that, again, your community stays resilient and continues to grow. Next slide, please, Angie. So again, when you're talking about broadband, I think that, and I think that Deborah did a great job about this. And so I'll just, there's nothing groundbreaking in this on this slide. It's really what you need is you need to come up with a plan. You need to identify what your resources are, what you actually need versus what you want, and is if your project is scalable, and then work on finding some solutions for that. So I think, that's where I'm happy to join in, on the work that Deborah's doing. If you want to bring Deborah in and form BATS, I think that's a great option. we would definitely encourage it. Just let us know where we can help, because that really is the key. I've talked to several, when I talk to ISPs, and I know, and Don said the same thing. If you go for a USDA grant, which we want to help facilitate and help communities apply for, if you don't have a plan and you don't know what you need and you can't demonstrate the ROI and why this is a cost-effective project, then you're not going to get awarded the grant to kind of build out that infrastructure. So really the planning is a crucial component. Next slide. Perfect. So really what we've been very fortunate. I want to really say a huge thanks to Governor Little and Director Keeley and our coronavirus task force in Idaho for CFAC for giving us the authority to roll out a broadband grant. We are lucky to kind of carve out $50 million to deploy into rural Idaho. This is something that we wouldn't really have expected to do, and so I'm so flabbergasted that we got this opportunity, but it's had tremendous impacts. So we received about 137 applications requesting $83 million in funds. So that will give you a good idea about the actual the need out there is far greater than what we were expecting. And these were for short-term projects. I think if we were allowed to kind of have an extended deadline, I think you would have seen that that number and that demand be probably twice as high as that. So it was quite substantial. The grants were to basically improve. It went into 3 categories: fund households, so basically improve project areas where less than 50% of the households had access to broadband speed, which is defined by the FCC as 25 megabytes down, 3 megabytes up. And then improve fiber capacity to anchored institutions. Again, something Don talked about in his presentation, to like city halls and community facilities, as well as create and install a Wi-Fi hotspot. So again, in times of emergencies, people can go to those wireless hotspots and have access to the internet. It's crazy. Like, I was talking with a city in Magic Valley last week, and they were so excited to get their hotspot live because they were hearing calls from the community from people, again, who could not afford broadband because they did not make enough money in their household to be able to kind of use these community hotspots that were connected to the park to be able to access the internet when they needed to. I mean, it's simple things like that a lot of people it kind of, I think, it's not thought about. But again, like, these are important resources for those that cannot afford it. So that's again, like, that's been really great. And then we did one telehealth project in St. Mary's, again, improving connectivity to that rural clinic there. And telehealth is a crucial component of the CARES Act, which is the funding pot that we used. I think there's huge opportunities for improved healthcare in rural Idaho. I mean, when you live in Elk City, or even Orofino, and you're going to need to drive to the major, a hospital for, major surgery, wouldn't it be nice if you could kind of work with your local clinic or hospital, and they could engage with the regional hospital for more technical assistance, so that you don't have to make a long drive for healthcare. Or maybe, mental health is a huge opportunity for telehealth. It's going to open up a whole lot of possibilities, I think, especially in areas that are struggling and where people really don't have a whole lot of options. So again, there's just so many great things that will come from this, just from improving the ability for people to kind of have access to the internet. Next slide, please. Perfect. And of course, we're seeing just an incredible amount of impact. I'm running, I don't want to take up too much time because I'm running close, but we're seeing it's pretty great. This is a project in Lewis County that we had. So it's a household project, or we have a household project in Lewis County. So we funded about 470. The grant itself is about 470,000, connecting about 1,000 households using fixed wireless. Again, it's kind of, Don talked about, again, understanding what understanding what your community needs is really important, and what will be the most effective in delivering broadband to them. I would love to do fiber to the home for every single home in Idaho, but that's also not feasible to do unless I magically land on a pot of money that's probably billions of dollars deep, and then I have infinite amounts of time to complete that. So my goal is to really find as good of solutions as humanly possible in a short amount of time to get more people connected. So this project in Lewis County is pretty great in my perspective. The community itself is 3,800 people. So we're covering we're covering about a quarter of the residents there with better broadband, which is really neat. Where it's going to connect in communities in Winchester, Craigmont, and Rubens. The other neat thing is that the one in Winchester is actually that tower, or that equipment is going on top of a water tower, which we also funded using a CDBG grant, which is pretty cool. So as Don mentioned, water towers are great. Using that existing infrastructure where you can kind of in your community and high points, so that you can kind of broadcast out the community, are great ways to increase broadband without actually using or spending a lot of money. Yeah, and there's just it's really neat because we've already heard like a lot of benefits from this. Like there's as I mentioned, there's Kuski Inn, which I kind of briefly talked about before. They're benefiting, even though they're in the adjacent county, from one of the towers there. They didn't have internet before. Now they did. Now they do. They actually sent an email to like all their members, like shouting to the rooftops how excited they were that they had broadband, which is really neat. And there's there's another story too in Idaho County that's being impacted from one of our grants, where there was a small business there that basically their point of sale system had to operate offline, because they didn't have internet. So every day they'd run transactions, they couldn't actually process them live. They'd have to go elsewhere and go connect their system. Now they have broadband. Now they can actually process all their transactions in real time, which again seems like maybe a minor thing, but you think about like from a loss prevention sort of standpoint, what happens if you have a couple of credit cards that don't run or don't process? And think about the extra time, let alone like if they're fraudulent or if you're not going to get money back. So that sort of stuff for a small business can really mean a lot and can make a huge difference. So anyways, I could go on and talk. It's almost close to 12. I want to leave it open for questions. But I would say there's a lot of great opportunities out there. Come up with a plan, see what you can do with your community. Working with your ISPs. I think that there's a lot of communities out there right now that are working on building out their own public infrastructure projects. You have communities that are kind of emulating Ammon, like the city of McCall, city of Mountain Home. So if you're interested in doing kind of a more public infrastructure model, look at them and talk to them. There's also communities like the city of Emmett that are building out their projects, their infrastructure, basically connecting more of their public infrastructure, like their water pumps, to city businesses. And they've basically been able to increase the number of ISPs in their community from 2 to 6. So they've been really effective as well, using a kind of a bootstrap model to build out their infrastructure network and allow more providers to kind of hop in on the dark fiber there. So there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, as it were. So the important thing is, I think, looking at what your community needs, what your options are to kind of fund the infrastructure that you desperately need, and then start working and gathering those partners together and coming up with a plan. So, and then of course, always reaching out to the state if you need any advice or help, or any sort of networking that you may need. So with that, I'll leave it. I'll send my, I think a lot of people on this have my contact information, but certainly I'll put it in the chat. Everyone here knows how to get a hold of me, and looking forward to working with everybody too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric. That's so cool to see all those local examples and hear from these businesses that are really being impacted, especially since, as Don mentioned, the economic development impacts are going to be long-term. So I'm excited to see in 5 years where some of these go. So we are running a little bit behind schedule here. So if you all can hang with us for about 10 more minutes, I promise it's going to be worth your time and we're going to get through this pretty quickly here. We're going to take about 1 or 2 minutes here to just review the results of our poll. If you need to take a quick break, please do. And then we're going to turn it over to Scott Woods with Broadband USA, and he's going to run us through a quick thought exercise and a preview of our upcoming sessions. So let's see here. So we'll end our polling and share the results real quick here. So you can see here where we're kind of at. Does your community or region have a BAT or BAT-like group? Most people said they don't know or know. And I just want to point out, if you are one of those people, you have so many resources on this call. You have Eric, you have Sita, you have PAC. Talk to us and we would love to help you to form these BAT teams, both at a community and at a regional level. What planning step would you place your community in? Most people said they're assembling a team. I think I would agree with that. I don't know about everybody else on the call here. Feel like that's about where we're at. We're starting to get our feet underneath ourselves. What planning step does your community need assistance with? So this is an important one. And you can see a lot of varied results in the answers here, especially as you're moving into these more technical options. When Don was talking about evaluating tech options, developing finance models, things like that, I can definitely see those being ones where we're going to need a lot of outside resources coming to the table for that. And who is missing from your BAT? So hopefully if you are one of these people who said they were going to drop names in the chat, you called those people right out. But if they are not here today, please do invite them to be part of this. And it is interesting that I see here a local team leader, a champion, a facilitator is a common need here. So as we continue these discussions, let's think about who might be a good person for that role. And that's something we'll talk about in our upcoming TA sessions. So Scott, are you ready to take it away here?
I am. Thank you very much. And I do appreciate everyone's time today. Just a reminder, when we initially planned this out, we were looking forward to coming and doing this in person. So we've had to modify somewhat to make sure that we can accommodate you virtually. So I really do appreciate everyone hanging in there. Really quickly, I'm gonna do this in about 2 minutes. It's a thought exercise, as Don covered the asset inventory slide. So what we want you to do is think about, and then Sita and PAC will pick up on this during their technical assistance sessions, is review those slides about the asset inventory, right? You want to identify those assets that are available. And Eric talked about this in his presentation, those water towers and physical structures, that you maybe ignore or think they don't have any value or benefit. But in fact, they do, and they in fact defray the cost or can be used as assets to invite a provider to come in and provide infrastructure in your community. So we want you to use this opportunity to evaluate assets in your community, right? The barn, rooftops, light poles, any structures you think may be useful and beneficial to to defray the cost and be attractive to be used to expand broadband infrastructure. So review those inventory slides and then come prepared to discuss at the Sita and PAC technical assistance sessions that they'll hold, along with the other topics that they'll have for the community's use. So we thank you for that. And next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Karen, who's going to preview our next session, number 3, using data as a foundation for your plan.
I just wanted to let you know that that next session, which is on December 10th, it's really a 3-part session. So one part is that I'll be reviewing the 3 major federal data sets that support broadband. The second part is a review of tools that put that data in your hands. And the third part is we're going to give you time to use those tools to look at your broadband data. And we'll be demonstrating those tools to make it easier for you to look at the data. So be not afraid. Data is fun. And most people walk away from this session being a lot more comfortable with the data and finding out how you can use it as part of a broadband plan, as part of a grant application, as part of a business plan, and either to make the case for broadband, to tell your broadband story, or to have a good broadband argument. You can use it a lot of different ways. So please come. It's usually a lot of fun.
Thank you, Karen. So really quickly, it would have been way too much to include a detailed overview of the business plans in this session. So we had a TBA. We're going to do a future session where we really go over the nuts and bolts of broadband infrastructure and network business plans. If you can go to the next slide, just want to provide a quick overview for you. You can take a snapshot of this, a screenshot, and we'll work with CETA and PAC and do another session where we can go into more detail. Again, building a plan, as you heard from both Don and Eric, as well as Deborah, is really valuable whether you're going to be dealing with your local service provider or if you want to try to develop a strategy, a process, or a system on your own. So again, just as an overview, you're going to be looking at what's available in the marketplace, and we'll go over how you do that, conducting the feasibility studies, an example. Understanding the users and customers' needs. So we talked about in the planning process with your stakeholders, how you develop your community priorities, and then how you show that for your customers and potential users of broadband and broadband infrastructure, and then how that network can meet those needs. And that will aid your understanding and conversations with your service provider. It will aid in your applying for federal resources, either through USDA or EDA, or in conjunction with a service provider to the FCC. And so we'll go over the critical components of the plan, network highlights, really detailed financial information, the role of partners, and your implementation strategy. Next slide, please. And I want you to take a snapshot of this, and I'll do this in 10 seconds. This is just an overview of what, again, the steps that are involved. It really ties together everything that we talked about up till now, the Broadband 101, the planning, the BAT teams, and the resources that are available in the state from the Idaho Broadband Task Force. So again, making decisions, performing the research, determining what you need from a demand service offering, considering the operational requirements, and then documenting, tabulating those financial projections. So we will work with CETA and PAC, and we'll announce that as a future session, again, just to go into more detail that will aid your understanding, not only working with your local service provider, but again, you'll need some of this detailed information as you work with federal and other resources. You can go to the next slide. That was perfect timing. So again, I encourage everyone, again, if you need the technical assistance, you don't have to figure all this out on your own. You have your CETA and your PAC representatives. We're here at Broadband USA to also help you. You can take a snapshot of this as well. It'll be on the presentation slides that'll be sent out. Please feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call, and we will definitely make ourselves available to help you. So thank you very much. I'm sorry we went over time by 2 minutes, but we're doing our best, and we thank you for your time today. So Angie, I will kick it back to you. Thank you very much.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up here real quick. Some important links were just dropped in the chat. I saw Karen drop the Eventbrite link to register for upcoming sessions. Please make sure that you do that. And then TM O'Connell mentioned an upcoming webinar for the USDA Community Connect program, I believe. And that is coming up on 11/24. So please scroll up and check his comment there. And I'll also make sure to include information about that in the follow-up email for this. But that Community Connect program is a great opportunity if you are in an underserved community. Applications are due on 12/23. So this upcoming data workshop is perfect timing to sneak in there right before that deadline. So get on both of those, please. Our upcoming technical assistance with meetings for regions are going to be held on Thursday, December 3rd. For North Central Idaho, we'll be meeting at 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific. For North Idaho, 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific, please contact Dorian or myself if you wish to sit in on those. And last things last, please help us continue to improve this experience by completing the evaluation, and I will send that SurveyMonkey link out to everybody as well. So if there are no outstanding questions for any of our presenters while they're on the call here, I think we are about ready to wrap up. Any last thoughts? All right, so we sure appreciate all of our presenters today, Deborah, Eric, and the Broadband USA folks. This is an incredible resource to come to our region, and we're glad to continue this discussion with all of you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us for this, and we hope to see you on December 3rd and on December 10th.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.